Welcome everybody. This is the second planning Hangout on Air for H+Pedia. My name's David Wood. I'm one of the co-founders of H+Pedia. And the point of this discussion today is to try and collectively get a better handle on what are the priorities for what needs to be done for the project in the next month or so. And when we talk about the project, it's got two things that it's trying to accomplish. First of all, it's trying to collect reliable information about transhumanism, information that people will find credible, accessible, authoritative, non-sensational. And secondly, it's trying to create a framework that's going to allow more people to participate in this project. So we're looking at not just what content should we be collecting, we're also looking at what do we need to do to encourage more people to take part. What we want to do to find the roles that interest people, and what are the blockages, if any, that need addressing. So what I propose to do is I'm going to share a screen. I'm going to share the contents of the Trello board, which you may be able to see now on the main screen. Let's make this slightly bigger. So this shows a couple of columns. What's already been done, we'll talk briefly about that. Some stuff that's blocked, nothing in there yet, though in the course of this meeting we may decide that things are blocked. What's happening? Then there's a much longer list called the backlog, which is things that we think probably should happen, though they haven't been started yet. And then there's another list, which could be a lot longer as well, which is suggestions, which things have been proposed, but nobody has actually made any significant commitment to yet. And the point of this meeting, as I say, is that we will try and prioritize some of these topics, and maybe others which will emerge in the course of the discussion. So let me briefly give a chance for the other panelists to speak. Let me stop sharing my screen, and you can see some of the other panelists. And maybe if I let you, Chris Monteiro, introduce yourself, and also talk through some of the things that you've been doing recently with H+Pedia, primarily from the done list from that page.
Sure. Hello, I'm Chris. Yeah, this H+Pedia project has been running, from my perspective, I've been running for about 4 months now, though David set it up a fair bit before that. And I found it an invaluable tool to capture transhumanist community. You can describe transhumanist as optimistic, as futurist, as passionate, but I wouldn't describe transhumanists as organized. Quite the opposite. And there's such a gap in the organization of transhumanist ideas and organizations that it was quite easy in some respects to write a lot of the material I've written. And so many emergent ideas and projects have built off the back of it that I'm just looking at this H+Pedia project to have incredible potential for the community and advocacy of the issues, and yeah, look forward to it. And there's so much opportunity. That's why we've gone and have ideas about so many backlog ideas and rooms for development and rooms for organization, which are getting more complex now. And I guess we're going to talk through some of them today and see how they fit into an overall strategy for the project. And yeah, and I think it should be pretty productive.
Great, and we are joined so far with one other panelist. That's Amnon Eden. Maybe Amnon, you can briefly introduce yourself and say what your interest is in this project.
Hi, I'm Amnon Eden. I'm an independent researcher, and I think H+Pedia can potentially develop to a seminal source on the subjects, and maybe help us organize a bit better, like Chris would have wanted. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, we can see the inspiration from Wikipedia. There are other models that we could borrow from, like Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Sorry, so that's one enterprise I had the pleasure of being involved with. where experts are invited to write each of the subject they know about most by a editor, and there is a whole editorship by sections and by subjects and by areas of interest in philosophy, etc. And that's a very successful model. The difference, of course, from Wikipedia is that it's much less interactive, so it's a lot more old-fashioned in that sense. So, yeah, I'm just wondering which model would suit us.
Okay, well, that's exactly along the lines that some of the discussion I wanted to have. There's a suggestion that has been raised several times, which we should be a little bit more structured about assigning responsibilities for particular areas of the site to individuals. Currently, it's very much volunteer-driven. People work on whatever they want to volunteer on. There's no system of authority in which we have to decide in advance who's going to be responsible for various areas. We've got off the ground in this way, and it may be appropriate to start being a bit more formal about some of the content areas in which people say they're going to take responsibility, and we look into their background and say, actually, this person does seem to be a good choice for responsibility for a particular area. So that's one of the framework discussions which we might have. So I know there's several people viewing now. Just a reminder to everybody, you can pose questions or comments as we go on by clicking that Q&A button. And I see there's several joined, so we've got a couple of questions. We may as well take those ones straight away from Randall Kuhn, who is asking us, well, of these two models, that's the Wikipedia model or SEP, the Stanford, I don't know, can't quite remember what SEP stands for, but the Stanford editorial process.
Yeah.
So which of them is more feasible, given the strictures of the available contributors' time and consistency? So, I mean, I'm not quite sure which is feasible. I know that the volunteer model is starting to work and it's building more momentum, and I'm pleased with that so far, but I don't expect it will necessarily just grow organically exactly as we want it. So, and Chris, do you have any thoughts on this Stanford Encyclopedia model?
Yes. So I think this comes into the question of how much H+Pedia is meant to be authoritative and how much weight its writing should carry to, what's our standard we're going for, which is a pretty big question, really. Where possible, I'm using two sourcing standards. One is basically you have to source your information. You can't just write stuff. You have to reference like external people who've done it. Ideally, most notable sources, but transhumanist bloggers, anything like that will usually suffice. And so you should always prefer existing thought and capturing that to original thought. However, I have as I said, a loosely defined currently original research policy, which I'm applying in a number of areas. So my area around describing transhumanist oligarchic dystopian scenarios, for example, is me condensing a lot of our ideas in an original format, and it can be difficult to distinguish between sourced material and original research material outside of the tagging we have going on. Now, we could have a system whereby vetted contributors, for example, let's say you have a transhumanist blog or you've got some scientific credentials or otherwise established yourself in the community in some other way, we could vet them through a light process, and then vetted contributions we could have a method of giving them higher prominence, and unvetted contributions labeling them with increased skepticism. So I do actually feel we want to support as many contributing models as gets the work done. I think Wikipedia goes quite far in the sense that if you're an expert in something on Wikipedia and you say this is wrong, Wikipedia doesn't care. Wikipedia says it has to be sourced, but it doesn't matter. Now, given the relative small size of the transhumanist community, we're in a position that we probably can vet our experts, and thus we can treat this differently and have some people speak with authority. Which yeah, we're good.
Okay. What I've done in the meantime is I have added a card to our Trello board, which I'll now share again on the big screen. And just down here, it's maybe too hard for people to read. Consider adopting some of the model of SAP, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which I put on the suggestions list, where it can sit until somebody wants to take it up and turn it into a little bit more of a fleshed out story, to use the Scrum language. So we've got the scene set. Let's talk about some of the accomplishments recently, which is in this done page. We started off 6 months ago with very much bare bones implementation of MediaWiki, and it has been fleshed out with a number of plugins, templates, extensions, such as this recent page extension, the citations reference plugin, a short URL extension, stats information for the home page, things that provide a little bit more utility to both editors and viewers. So it's come along quite a long way. There has been a Facebook group created, also a Twitter account created, and indeed we've had now a couple of these successful Hangouts on Air, small steps forward. And one thing I've done is I keep upgrading to whatever the latest version of MediaWiki is. So that's what we've already got done. And I'm quite pleased with the progress so far. It's been running for 6 months. I see the project has taken 12 months to get its real feet on the ground, with having enough information that people will quite often want to click on it to see what our take is on a subject. And people will be confident enough that there's likely to be useful information. What I would like to spend more time talking about is some of the stuff that's either in progress or on the backlog in terms of things that we might want to prioritize. So one thing I've personally done since the last Hangout, when quite a few people said it was pretty difficult to get going editing articles. Everybody who looks at this is reasonably bright, but when you start clicking on an article, it moves into some it moves into some markup language in which not everybody is immediately comfortable with that. It's not a WYSIWYG system, and people have told me that's put them off. And I don't want there to be barriers preventing people getting going. Of course, if people are already used to Wikipedia, then there's no learning or not much learning, and so we've already got them easy to participate, but there are others for whom that's not the case, and including, as I said, potentially good contributors who are just feeling a bit awkward with it. So there were 2 proposals that came up in the last event. One is that we should find better instructional materials, and so what I have done over the last week is I created a couple of short 5-minute videos, which are now visible from the front page of the H+Pedia site. In fact, it's in the welcome page. From there are a couple of short videos intended to give people some encouragement as to how to go about that editing. And we could look at them if necessary. So that's going, and I'm interested to hear feedback from anybody either now on the course of the call or later when people review this video afterwards as to whether they think these videos are actually useful or not. And there's a broader thing we might do, which is this one down here: explore options for a WYSIWYG editor for content. And it does strike me that this could be something quite significant, a differentiator for this site, if we can access some of the thinking that's in the broader wiki community about making it, providing a WYSIWYG editor for this. So we discussed this a bit last time. Chris, you seem to know a thing or two about what's happening in Wikipedia land with a WYSIWYG editor. I just wonder if you could share that now.
Sure. So, okay, first of all, there are some WYSIWYG editors out there. I need to create a little backlog of them, evaluate them, implement them, and we talk about defaults. So this is just a technical task. I can tell you a bit about Wikipedia politics, which is quite interesting. you'd think Wikipedia would, like, egalitarian, bring the knowledge of everyone to the world and having the same kind of view on things. It really doesn't. There's this huge slide off between the highest contributing Wikipedians, the next 50%, and everyone else, which is to say, contribution is not flat at all. And as a consequence, Wikipedians, when I talk about Wikipedians, you are by far talking about the most hardcore contributors to it. And they get what they want because the democratic process is based around engagement. And if you're engaged, you are one of these core people and you are driving the conversation. So that's the reason that their WYSIWYG editor implementation has been so controversial, because their WYSIWYG editor is not designed for the users and the like contributors to Wikipedia. It's designed, because it is designed for the like contributors to Wikipedia and not designed for the core users who don't want it. I am unfortunately a microcosm of this right now, in the sense that it's not high up my list of things, but for the good of the project, it probably needs to happen. And there you go. So it's quite interesting the how that goes.
I think, as you said, it probably isn't the best thing for either you or me to spend our time on, because we are able to work on other things. But there may be other people who aren't yet heavily involved in the project, but who are looking at it, and it could be a good task for somebody else to pick up and to write an assessment of which editors are already available, to what extent they can be easily plugged in, and how it would work.
I mean, on that front, if there was someone with comparable sort of software configuration background who was willing to try out extensions and handle more of the technical back end of the project, I'd be totally willing to engage with someone on that. I can do that. David can pretty much do that too. It's just we'd rather focus on the content where we have to know how transhumanism is working rather than the technical stuff. So if there was someone who just had a technical bent, you'd probably up for any area support in that area too.
Okay. Well, we're looking hopefully for people at some stage to get in touch with us and say that they can help us with that task. Another task which is underway, and I see as incredibly important, is the work on merging the content of other wikis which are in existence, but which have to some extent fallen into a bit of disrepair, which have got good material, but which isn't really accessible easily to other people. And I know, Chris, you have been doing a great deal of work looking at different editors, different wikis. So maybe again I'll ask you to talk about how you see that going forward, so that we could get more people involved and we could go more quickly into the mergers and acquisitions, as it were.
So I'm doing this, reaching out to other wikis, I'm doing for two reasons. One is to just get a better lay of the land, understand who main contributors are, who are players, because, as I said, transhumanism is disorganized, and when we started this project, we didn't know about any other people doing this. Well, I knew about Less Wrong, who aren't really count, obviously Wikipedia, but the fact we discovered some significant wikis doing significant amounts of futurist type projects is very important. And also the fact that these projects are by and large inactive now. It shows that there have been previous attempts to organise some of these ideas, and then they've petered out for whatever reason, presumably because the main contributors have got lost, or because they lost central authority, or maybe it was designed by a small group. They never really opened it up to other people. Never had a growth strategy or a way of attempting to grow exponentially at least. So I can see a lot of failings in some of these, but nonetheless a lot of really good material. For example, I mean, just to focus on the non-core ones. For example, I encountered a site called Cyborg Anthropology, by a UX expert woman who's done TED Talks about it. She's talking about how we are all cyborgs because of how we're interconnected with information, etc., etc. And she talks about basically transhumanism in the contemporary context at a lot of depth. And her wiki hasn't been updated in 3 years. She's written a book about it, which I've ordered and going to read now. But what was potentially a project for exponential growth is now just a publication. And whether someone like that would be interested in folding or cooperating in content, that's a big question, and that's more of a future thing. She has a very established site, for example. But in the shorter term, as I said, I found the much smaller sites like the Future Wiki on Future Wikia and this Transhumanism Wiki on Wikia. Transhumanism Wiki is a complete mess. I'm basically going through bureaucratic hurdles to try and work out how it can be salvaged, because it's basically mostly it's 95% of it is content copied from Wikipedia 4 years ago, which is copyright infringing. They can't do that, and nonetheless it gets search results. So dismantling a wiki which is established is a project in itself. So I'm working on that. But anyone else familiar with Wikia, I'd love them to help me on that too, so I won't have to do it. The ones I mentioned, the larger ones, which I'm very keen to work on, Future Wikia and Future Wikidot by futurists. A lot of these have a slightly broader scope about futurism. They might be focused about space travel and being a bit out there in terms of technologies. But there's a lot of people willing to have a light engagement on these projects, and they don't have the goal necessarily of let's talk about making transhumanism mainstream. They more have a goal of let's talk about fun future shit, which is fine, but can we do them all in one place? These are interesting questions. So I've never taken over a wiki before. Well, I actually have taken over one, but the guy basically gave it to us. So even approaching something like, how do you approach an organization which may not even have a single leader, and how do you talk about what their strategy is when they may not even have a strategy, and talking about how can you work together when they've never had to work with anyone before? And these are, well, I'm proceeding cautiously, but there's so much potential in out of cooperation in terms of the user base and the content that I think they can be incredibly rewarding. So rather than having to build a brand new viewer base out of already established transhumanists, we can build our contributor base out of existing futurists who are already familiar with wiki editing. And I think this has some advantages in terms of getting that potential exponential growth. So that's why these are important projects.
So if anybody hasn't seen it, there is a page on H+Pedia, which I'm showing now, which summarizes some of the knowledge that we've got about other existing wikis. I think this is a great starting point, and it may well be that we can identify some of these wikis as relatively better than others for working together with us. Some of them, as you say, Chris, are in various complicated situations, which will take us a lot of work administratively, legally, or whatever to partner with and collaborate with. Others may be more straightforward. So I think this is a very useful starting point, which has actually got a lot of information in it already. And I think quite a few of the wikis you talked about just now are on that list. Other things listed, to be clear, are strong in their own right. They have got a lot of independent knowledge, and there's no question of us seeking to submerge their activities under the H+Pedia umbrella, but there may well be good systems of pointers and two-way cooperation possible with some of them too. At this stage, I'd like to welcome Mark to the call. Mark, are you able to introduce yourself? Are you able to speak?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, very great. Mark Larquinto, that's my online name. Robert Batts, for those who don't know me personally. I have been interested in transhumanism for many years. It only in the last 3 years has it all started to come together course, as David knows, having been there, right there in the heart of it in England, where you guys have started the real bringing together that hadn't happened previously in the past. I've been following that with great interest. And my life is lived in Facebook pretty much, with so gathering bits and pieces from here and there and trying to distribute them throughout the community around the world as much as possible. So that's who I am.
And you've been watching H+Pedia fairly closely, and I'm wondering, what do you see as the kind of next step priorities? What are the priorities for things that ought to be considered to allow more people to engage and to allow the content to build up better, either more quickly or more authoritatively?
Right now I'm trying to get my head around the approach that you guys have settled on, which is gathering pieces together and building from those blocks that are already out there. Whereas I guess, I don't know if that's me or maybe more of an American business approach, but that would be like that would be a very short step, and then you start throwing things out there and knocking them together and come back and review it then. Did that make any sense to anybody?
Yeah, so you're saying that in an American business style, people will try things. They would try things quickly, indeed, often pulling ideas from different places, such as we're pulling content potentially from a number of sources, from people and also from existing wikis. But then, very critically, it's important to review after a while and say, well, actually, what have we accomplished in this? And in a sense, that's what I'm hoping, regular kind of calls that we will from time to time take stock and say, well, actually, how has this worked? What's worked well and what hasn't worked well?
Right, and then worry about who did this, keep track of who it belongs to. Don't publish it. And then say, okay, we got this from here, we have to go get an okay from these folks. Instead of the part I'm struggling with is this idea of, in order to work with it, we have to go get permission, which is how it comes across to me. That may be not what you're doing, but that's how I'm hearing it. Whereas I would say, go get all the information, make sense out of it, decide what you want to use, and then go back and seek permission from the places where you got it. I mean, it's out there to use, as long as you're not publishing it.
Can I comment on this?
My first thought.
So content aggregation, copyright, and the whole ecosystem is quite interesting. I definitely see what you get at, Mark, in the sense that we could certainly have been much more aggressive so far in terms of importing content. We could have been literally copying and pasting Wikipedia pages. We could have been copy pasting content from these other wikis, and I don't actually think we will achieve anything for this. I'll tell you why. So if you look at the history of transhumanism.wikia.com, this is exactly what they did. They did it 6 years ago. The founder picked 250 really good transhumanist pages on Wikipedia, and he copy-pasted each of them onto his wiki. Since then, like 99% of them are unchanged. They have broken templates, broken cross-links, and they're 5 years out of date with the primary Wikipedia page. Ultimately, reproducing what Wikipedia does and forking it, I don't think is actually, from my perspective, what I think the mission of H+Pedia should be. I don't think it should aim to be the most comprehensive resource in detail on any given subject. However, I think it should attempt to address the breadth of transhumanist thought and idea in a way that, covering some of the more fringe, less known areas and less known organizations. And yeah, and it's the breadth which gives us the edge against, again, Wikipedia. I can write about, interesting spiritual transhumanist ideas and organizations for tiny organizations with like 10 people involved. But that can have a page, and it can be linked in thematically, and it can have its advocacy, and it can have its individuals involved, and it can really place things in a map of where the true transhumanist community is. And that I think is really important. Now, in terms of inclusion of external materials, now, great thing about not copy pasting and writing things from scratch is that you never fall foul of copyright if you do it correctly. If I have a whole bunch of articles, say technical news articles, and I want to quote and cite and include and amalgamate them into an article, I'm absolutely able to do that under any copyright laws, Western copyright laws. Is absolutely fair use, is absolutely the correct use of citations, and to create original work. And of course, we reference original work as well, so people go into that and they can bring up more citations and reuse it elsewhere. And that's why obviously citations are important. But I literally see no reason to be more aggressive in our content import policy, except where it pertains to merging with other sites right now.
So I agree with all of that. I mean, this is not about building just a huge amount of content for content's sake. There is a need to write about things from a unique transhumanist perspective. And there's a need to cover organizations, people, projects which don't yet meet the Wikipedia standard for noteworthiness. There is the need to write more about these organizations and people and projects than would be supported by Wikipedia. So we are looking to cover content with a particular broad transhumanist angle. So it's not just about grabbing material from elsewhere. But where other wikis exist which have had similar views to ours, similar goals, and that are no longer flourishing because they have fallen into various states of disrepair, then we're very interested in leveraging, taking advantage of any good material that is there which would meet that same goals as ours. So yet again, it's not a copy of Wikipedia, it is an interesting and important transhumanist perspective which deserves greater publicity and greater prominence. But in the midst of all that, there is the question of licensing. And Chris, you asked a question a while ago, and there's been some more discussion on Facebook as to what kind of copyright and licensing policy we should be adopting. And so far, nothing in particular has happened in that field, and I'm feeling this is something we ought to be paying attention to.
Yes, obviously licensing copyright on the internet is a mess, just because you can use the best Creative Commons CC BY license that you want, but if someone's going to go and copy paste that to their own wiki, for example, without crediting you, as what happened with the transhumanism.wiki.com, you can't do anything about that unless you're willing to expend resources fighting it. And this is not exactly what I signed up for, in the sense that I don't really want to worry too much about if someone copy and pastes our content somewhere and doesn't credit us, whether we put ourselves in a position that we are obliged to go after them with existing copyright legislation. Now, maybe we do need to reserve that. Maybe that is important for the existence and the project. There's many different perspectives on this. So I don't want to be the guy censoring or pulling down content or sending threatening letters to people about copyright. But but maybe I haven't been creative enough in thinking in a futurist sense. I haven't thought of a scenario where someone could abuse copying our content and use it to undermine transhumanism or the project, and maybe we would need it to protect that. But I don't know if that is necessary. So these are the sort of questions I have in my mind, and this is why I've not been able to come up with a definitive idea on what our copyright policy should be, personally.
My own instincts are to be quite liberal here as well, in the sense of let people copy it if they wish, and if they don't attribute it to us, that's not a big disaster. Hopefully the site will gain in prominence, gain in visibility overall, and more people will realize often that a lot of the material is coming from us in due course. So, but I haven't made my mind up about it either, and I'm interested in feedback generally from other people watching this perhaps later, or other people commenting online as to how seriously we should be trying to establish our own ownership of this material in a way that prevents people from just republishing it wholesale without attribution back to us. Anybody else want to comment on that, or should we move on? I don't have a resolution to that. I'm keeping that item on the backlog. Perhaps we should actually move it off the backlog and move it into the in progress, except that I'm not clear that there is any progress that's actually happening beyond the fact that we're thinking about it. So once somebody says they want to own it, we might move it forwards. Otherwise, we'll keep it in the backlog column.
An interesting question, David, perhaps, is other transhumanist publications, be it Humanity Plus, IET, etc., is there an emergent paradigm in terms of their copyright policies? So rather than trying to invent this ourselves, you know, what are existing people doing?
I don't know. That is a good question. So maybe we can modify this card, agree a policy on copyright license, and I'll add to the bottom of that, find out what other sites are, find out if anything is emerging as a transhumanist best practice.
I think it'd be quite interesting what we find there. I would expect it to be wildly inconsistent, I would expect, but I'd expect to see some trends as well.
So if that's in progress, there needs to be somebody responsible for it. So I put my name responsible for that for the time being. And let's see if I can report back in a month's time as to any progress there. If people have got answers more quickly, then that will be great. Mark, you have a question, I see, about what our emphasis on. Is our emphasis on content or format? And if format, are we more interested in design or underlying structures? So my own view on this is it's not one or the other. I said right at the very beginning of the call that we do want content, but equally we want to get the framework right that's going to allow people to contribute without lots of barriers. And also, we want to avoid getting into a mess in due course with lots of people dumping material on top of us, which then subsequently takes a long time to untangle. Lots of material of a relatively unclear status, unclear value. So this whole call is focusing more on what I've called the framework than on the content itself, in the view that if we get the framework right, then the content will come along automatically. But of course, both Chris and myself and other contributors are frequently adding content, because whenever we discover something interesting, we're now in the stage that we can quite quickly create a page or amend an existing page. So we're keeping our eye on progressing the content, but we can't just think of content, we have to think of framework as well. Does that answer the question? Oh, Chris, go on.
Yeah, I'll offer a counterpoint to that, David. As a new contributor to H+Pedia, chances are you're not going to understand all the categories, all the streams of thought we got going anyhow. And the ability to write a complete page, fully categorized, fully cross-linked, is impossible. You can't do it unless you're like me and busy writing half of it and cross-linking it all the time. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, you see. As a new contributor, you can just write a page about some organization, and that's fine. And other contributors such as myself will come along and review it, and we'll add the semantics to it. We'll add the categories, the cross-linking, or even merge it if something else needs to be done. So I think for a new contributor that doesn't actually need to worry so much about the semantic wiki context. They can write about something that's not been written about before and source it nicely, and in the sense that that's some good material. They don't have to fully integrate it. That's actually okay, because integrating it can be quite easy for someone who understands the other points. So I guess I would actually seek for new contributors, e.g. most contributors, to create new content primarily, or obviously you can add into existing pages, of course, that's always welcome. But a new contributor wouldn't, for example, restructure our categories or merge semantics or try and disambiguate complex terms, because that takes a larger view. But simply writing content is probably the easiest way. Writing or penning content is probably the easiest way to get involved.
And this initial content could just be plain text in many cases.
Absolutely. I mean, you can write a page. It can be entirely plain text, and it's still readable. It's still a wiki page. It might not have fancy subheaders or links or categories. That's fine. The content is what's most important. Ideally, it is referenced a bit so we can follow it up. content with references is preferred. But then, yeah, that's a trivial job for someone to who maybe wants to care about the nitty-gritty, want to integrate that. So I'm fine with you know, kind of standalone content as long as it's cited, because then, you know, I can integrate that in minutes, for example.
So I think there is a good point in there, because I can imagine people are intimidated if they look at the structure of one of the larger pages and there's lots of categories in there, and people may wonder what they all mean. In fact, I have to confess, I often wonder what all the different categories are intended to mean. People can create them quite easily. So naturally, if I've got these questions, other newcomers may have these questions too. But we should emphasize that actually you don't need to get the page 100% right in any sense. It's just a useful contribution which expresses a transhumanist perspective on a topic, can then be improved by the overall group editing process. And it may well be that we have other people who don't originate new material often, but who come along and add the wiki sparkle to something, and add in the connections which require a bit more knowledge of how the system works. So some of this is leading me to another thing that's on my own backlog, which is reaching out again to all the people who have signed up for an account with the system. Don't have the exact figure off the top of my head, but there's several hundred, most of whom have signed for an account and then haven't made any contributions. And there ought to be a way, I feel, to email them some encouragement.
Are they all users, David? I have an impression, perhaps incorrectly, that we have a lot of bots registering which never register themselves. So I'm actually not sure how many would-be contributors we actually have when you factor in the bots.
So I guess there's various stages involved. People have to click on the thing that says register me, and then they've got to respond to the automatic email. I guess even a bot can do that as well. How will we know? I guess
the bots have not been doing that actually. It takes a relatively sophisticated bot to do that, and most of them haven't. But I'll be honest, when it comes to contributions like this feeds into the idea of that. Well, we could open up registration for anonymous contributors, for example. We could you know, get rid of registration or change registration entirely. Based on what I perceive to be a large amount of bots attempting to register, I'm quite happy with not doing that. But I don't know, on the other hand, if this has been a barrier to entry for transhumanists at all. I don't have the relevant feedback whether people prefer to make a quick anonymous edit here and there, then register an account, and which feels like a commitment. I don't really know.
So my own reading of other wiki sites is that many of them have been plagued by anonymous entries, which are more vandalism than anything else. So I prefer to keep this current system of needing to register an email address before any editing is made. And I will stick with that view until such time as people can provide evidence that this is what's causing a difficult barrier of entry to people. At the very beginning of the site, there were people reporting that they never got the sign-up email, and that something was wrong with the token that was provided in that sign-up email, and when they clicked on it, they weren't able to register. I haven't heard anybody reporting that for quite some time, so I'm hoping that some of the upgrades to the MediaWiki software in the meantime may have fixed that. But if people are still experiencing that, then please let me know. But regardless, there must be a bunch of real humans in that group. Some of the names I think I recognize as people in the real world, and I ought to be reaching out to them via some email. And I'm just basically asking, how does that work? Because I haven't yet found the bit in which I can send emails to all registered users. And I believe that the email addresses are private, and even as administrator, I don't see them, and that's all good.
Yeah, let me tell you what that is. So out of the box, MediaWiki has this kind of marketing function disabled, basically. The idea is that emails are exclusively for account registration and spam prevention. And the idea is that by default, you're not ever going to be signing people up to marketing or notification emails. And basically, so they've made it secure and very private by default. That said, I'm 95% sure there are extensions you can get to basically turn it into more of a marketing platform if necessary. So this could involve sending out just sending it like a newsletter, so manually sending a newsletter to user bases, or it can involve things like sending automated weekly digests of recent edits, for example, to keep people informed about stuff going on like that, and probably all sorts of things in between. I don't know. That's an area question. Is like, how much should we be marketing to the existing user base? Some, certainly. I think people with registered accounts could be reminded to get in touch, and especially if they know stuff's still going. I think that's going to be done there. There are so many different directions to move forward with engagement. This is just another one of them.
Okay, so I've, in the meantime, copied that, or rather I have moved that card from the Trello board from backlog into in progress, put my name alongside it as something that I want to look at, just at least as a welcome email, so that when people do register, then they are given some assurance that their registration has connected to human beings on our side, especially when people registered some time ago and they may not have had anything for a long time. I think this will be useful, but I will ensure that there is no way in which this gets exploited to send too much mail that people aren't wanting.
Some of the useful ways to keep people engaged, for example, there's a few settings we can tweak depending on how we're going to do it strategically. You can make it, for example, that when someone edits a page, they automatically watch that page, for example, and that goes into their watch list. And then you can make it when someone else edits the page that they're watching, that goes into a notification, or it goes into email digest to keep people coming back and reviewing and engaged, and so on and so forth. There's lots of ways of creating loops like that. You can go overboard with that, but again, it's useful to keep people engaged. I mean, forums these days send you email notifications when someone replies to a friend, and email as a notification tool is pretty ubiquitous, but people are kind of used to it because it's better sorted these days. So again, it comes back to, if we wanted to focus on contributions from registered people and repeat contribution, there are strategies in that area we could do. But again, I don't really know the size and potential of that market right now. I'm mostly working on emerging markets rather than that.
Okay. So I've talked through some of the things I believe I would like to work on over the course of the next month or so. I've picked out some things to do with the welcome emails, policy and copyright license, and to continue looking at welcoming videos or instructional videos to help people get going. I'm interested in any other suggestions from anybody as to what topics ought to be prioritized. There's lots on this Trello board which I haven't talked about at all, and I don't want to push them unless other people feel they ought to have a higher priority. So, any comments from either Mark or Amnon about anything that you feel ought to have a higher profile? What's this about review use of Google Analytics? I mean, Chris, you enabled Google Analytics some time ago. What should we find out about?
I was just making sure you had access to it, David. I set it up and gave you access. That's when you confirmed you have access, and that was it.
So what should we find out by looking at Google Analytics? Can we find
I've been, for example, every time I've been promoted an H+Pedia page on Reddit or on Facebook and it's taken off, I'll just go on Google Analytics and check the corresponding spike in views. Every time that happens, I'm looking for an increase in the base level reviews to indicate the returning users and users stick around. But analytics is quite powerful. You can do whole sort of conversion tunnels around there. I mean, we could be much keener on nagging people without accounts to register, and we can then see how many people dismiss the nag and how many people register. There's a number of things that you can do around this. We also got a default implementation, so we can see, we can see our top referrers, for example. We can see where the traffic's coming from. But actually, believe it or not, Facebook hides their referral URL. So if someone talks about H+Pedia in a Google group, you can't tell the traffic's coming from that group. You can only tell it's coming from Facebook, because Facebook are anonymizing your stats there. So given half of our traffic is from Facebook and most of the other half is pretty much from Reddit, I can only analyze the Reddit traffic through that. But that's the sort of thing I find out.
Okay, so there is useful information there, and we can discover, perhaps at least from Reddit, which are the pages on Reddit, or which are the comments on Reddit which are driving people to look at the material. Okay. Any other comments on any of the possible activities that ought to be prioritized? So Mark is asking, what specific issues have been raised about the name H+Pedia?
Can I comment?
Please do.
Right, so I hope everyone here has actually checked out the page I've written about transhumanist synonyms and related terms. It's a decent resource where you can find out different names related to people called transhumanism and so on and so forth, and H+ is one of them. Problem is, there's two problems of H+ in the name. One is you have to say H+, which is a very obscure term unless you're fairly involved in transhumanism already. I would say more people know about transhumanism than they know about H+, unfortunately. The second is it's a bit of a pain in URLs and domains as well. I don't think H+ has the brand recognition of transhumanism does. Now, I will totally say this is a problem with transhumanism in general, that the branding is all over the place. So I'm going to bring up a page on that. Synonyms.
I'm looking for it as well. I'm almost got there.
Transhumanist synonyms and closely related terms. So I've rated them.
The reason I couldn't find it is you've misspelt it.
Have I?
I'm sure synonym isn't spelt quite like that.
Oh no, it's not, is it?
I searched for it and didn't see it. Right.
That needs to be fixed. Okay, but yeah. So for example, I've put in a bunch of positive synonyms of transhumanism around posthumanism, H+, humanity+. But again, humanity+ is more the organization than an idea. Being a life extensionist is pretty easy sell these days. And techno whatever works, so be it techno-libertarian, techno-progressive, techno-optimist, these are good terms. And even biohacker, I'm a big fan of. But anything like futurist or cyborgist, singularitarian, immortalist, techno-utopian, or technophile, these are not universally positive terms. And there are appropriate times to use them, but you have to be careful. And I think, given the skepticism there is around transhumanism, I wouldn't want to adopt a term which is already too ambiguous. This is my theory here. I'm actually had an email correspondence with a bloke who owns technopedia.org and he wants to get rid of it. So I don't know whether that's something Technopedia would work. Something like that. That's an idea. I might even get the domain for that. We'll see about that. It's not stopping the project work right now. I mean, certainly for hardcore transhumanists, the fact it's called H+Pedia, no one cares. It's fine. The content is good. One day, we hope the project will reach a point that people will be browsing it who, maybe do a Google search and they find some idea and they're reading about it, but they've never heard of transhumanism before. And they go into it and they're reading about something and they're seeing H+Pedia and they're like, what is H+? Most people don't know this. I mean, it's again, within the community, it's appropriately neutral and we certainly non-contentious. We agree on it, but I'm not convinced. Well, I'm not married to the name, but then we need a really good alternative name. And again, comes up to transhumanist. Transpedia, Mark. See, again, that's one of the things we can't go with because the trans prefix is so well owned by transgender people now that this is what people will think of the name. We can't use that term, but I have certainly had that one pointed out. I have some friends who like to make fun of me in that area when I talk about transhumanism as well. I don't. But it's not. I certainly think branding itself, selling itself, making transhumanism acceptable and transhumanist ideas something people want to affiliate with is, I know if not number one, it should be one of the top concerns of transhumanists everywhere, frankly. And I don't think that enough discussion is actually is spent on this, and perhaps it's due to lack of a central resource where we can examine different options, which I like to think this page is a start of dealing with. But I think it's a very important question to deal with, and I would like this project, wherever it goes by, to be a part of moving that conversation forward.
So I see the importance of names. I see names are incredibly important, but I also am aware that lots of time can be spent in discussing names, and possibly without making much progress. So I'm slightly apprehensive about this discussion. But if the name is to change, it's better to change names sooner rather than later, because the more that the existing H+Pedia.org URLs exist, then well, I guess we can leave behind a redirect.
Yeah, we can redirect them. We can support the old domain. But we have to. We can keep that for like a couple of years if we wanted to. Just redirects.
So I shouldn't worry too much about that if we felt strongly that.
No.
Okay. When I see this wiki, it's about transhumanism, but I see it's also about the things that lead up to transhumanism. So futurism and radical futurism, which I've talked about before. Futurism is a serious discussion of the scenarios for the future. Radical futurism is the idea that some of these fast changing scenarios are credible within the lifetimes of many people alive today. So we're not just talking about long-term future, we're talking about the possibility within one human generation of very significant changes indeed. That's radical futurism. And then transhumanism sits on top of both of these by saying actually this is a great opportunity rather than just being a threat. It is a threat, but it's also a great opportunity because it allows us to transform human nature into something even better than it is already. So I want to include in the scope of this project the things that lead up to transhumanism, including futurism. But I think transhumanism is the theme that we lead with, and so that's the thing I'd most like to have in the name. And I've just used H+ as what I assumed was a broadly understood synonym for transhumanism, but maybe that's not quite right. So I'm open to suggestions online or offline about evolving this. So I would prefer that people who do get involved in this discussion should put at least some time as well into creating real content for the site rather than just debating the name. That's sort of the condition. We're almost out of time. I don't want this to go on beyond an hour. I'm open to any final comments or thoughts from anybody as to something they feel ought to be highlighted as we bring this conversation to a close. I've certainly got things to do myself as a result of this, and I'm interested in the feedback I've received already, and I expect there'll be more as more people view this video.
I just wanted to say, from my point of view, I'm finding the project very useful in cutting through certain debates, which is quite good, because in transhumanist circles you often have piece of tech news, comment, and the comments will often be the same thing. So it'll be like, this is good, or this is bad, or I don't know, that's too libertarian for me, or that's too status for me, etc., etc. And this happens, it's repeated again and again and again, and no one really learns anything, and then someone places more news, and the process repeats itself. This is an incredibly wasteful, and for me, who's been involved in this now for a couple of years, it's very frustrating to see what's happening. Now I can say, well, you know, people are talking about drug legislation, let's say, and I can say, I'll just paste in the drug page about it. There you go, I've captured all the ideas, all the interlinking things, and all the references. Anything to add to that? No? Well, you're probably not actually going to say anything useful then. Using Wikipedia, wiki meaning quick, is designed to quickly cut and quickly find information about something to people who are not familiar. And it's very difficult to tell in our circles people who know their shit from people who just act like it. Now, if you can expand upon or refute or comment on a H+Pedia page that has a number of items, the chances are that you're actually fairly well informed and as cutting edge, and that's brilliant. And putting the links in front of people is great. And if people can't, if people say blah 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 blah, that's all covered, the chances are you can see this person is not actually interested in contributing, but is interested in cheering on from the sidelines about whatever. So it provides a nice litmus test for engagement around this area. So I'm using it like that. I would recommend everyone else, even if you're not a contributor, you use H+Pedia in this way. And people will come along and say, that's rubbish, it should be blah, 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 blah. It's like, brilliant, you're a new researcher. Let's hear about this. And that's why I hope it will be a really useful tool for discussion on many, many points in this area.
Well, I share the same perspective that this is something that needs to transcend a lot of the cheerleading and the comments that take place online. There is a lot of fascinating news online, and there's a lot of interesting comments, but there isn't an accumulation of knowledge in any sensible way often, and there's no clear understanding of what's truly interesting and authoritative, rather than just yet another opinion. So I do urge people who are looking at online debates to try and ground them in contributions to H+Pedia, and then link back into the threads some material in H+Pedia that provides more gravitas for that discussion. And if there's just a torrent of discussions, it's so hard afterwards knowing what's strong and reliable and what was just somebody's opinion. And my goal is that this site will be seen as much more than just somebody's opinion. It will be something that, on the whole, is reliable and credible. Final question I see Mark has posted: other than writing content, what do we need help with? I guess the answer is anything that's in any of these cards on this Trello board. So if somebody knows about policy and copyright license and has a strong view on that, then that's something, a task that would be good to do. If somebody knows about the options for real rich text editing in wikis, then that's something that somebody could own as well. If anybody wants to join online the team, so that they can claim ownership for some of the items on the Trello board, then let me know, and I will invite you to join that Trello board. So it's anything that's on this Trello board is something that, in principle, we're interested in help with. And the further it is in the middle, in progress or backlog, then the more likely we are to want progress on it. Some of the stuff and suggestions are still there. They're just as suggestions. Any final comments from anybody else?
H+Pedia, tell your friends. It's very good.
H+Pedia, tell your friends.
Your blog, use it in your arguments, reference it. Mention when you talk about transhumanist stuff that you can find out more here. It is a good starting place for a number of topics. Just drop it into your interactions in this area, and it will help it grow both organically and in search engine and in relevance. And this will, this is quite, if you're involved in this already and you're already talking about these things, it should be quite easy to bring this into your conversation. So please do.
I think that's a great point to end on. So I want to thank everybody for taking part, and we'll probably get together online in about another month's time to review progress. Thanks, everybody.